Good evening, everyone, and welcome to In the Know with CaT Bobino. Today, my extra special guest is Dr. Kimble-Hill, PhD and Assistant Research Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at Indiana University School of Medicine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. What I just said was a mouthful. So, can you tell us what biochemistry and molecular biology is?
I will tell you, I am a biophysical chemist by training. And what that means is that I study biological problems by using physical science characteristics, techniques, and approaches. And so, what I'm using is really the natural occurrence of, for example, fluorescence, how things pick up light and reflect light. Or I use things like understanding how, for example, how oil and water that has those different phases, how that shows up in like cells and how that then leads to different cellular phenotypes. Particularly, I'm interested in breast cancer, so I'm looking at how these different changes in protein structure, protein function, and how these lipid dynamics all play together to create a more cancerous phenotype, and how that might lead to more aggressive cancers where it's more likely to metastasize to other parts of the body. Thinking about how these differences show up based off of race. So why do Black women have this, higher incidence? Well, we don't have a higher incidence rate of breast cancer in total, but why do we have specific types of breast cancer more likely than others and at younger ages? And why is it that, that these cancers show up more aggressive in Black women so that we have a higher mortality rate than our white peers? So I'm looking at these very physical characteristics of the cell to help explain those phenomena that we see.
Well, that's awesome. A lot of people look at the cell. We know very generic pieces of it, the powerhouse, the mitochondria, the nucleus, but you're looking at specific parts of the cells and specifically how things are interacting with each other
Mm-hmm.
and within breast cancer.
Yes.
Wow. So that is amazing. How did you get into this type of field?
So I will tell you, I, like so many other people, got into the specifics of what I'm interested in based off of experience and what impacts my family. And for me, the reason why I got into breast cancer specifically is because when I was in high school, my favorite aunt got diagnosed with breast cancer. And so, knowing her family history and
Mm-hmm.
how so many people in her family had come up with cancer, um, I really wanted to get into understanding what that was, and how can I prevent more people from my family from dying from breast cancer and other related cancers, because people forget too that a lot of times if you eradicate uh, breast cancer, it does oftentimes come back, and it may not come back in the same organ that it's starting with. So the metastasis to other organs is a big problem as well. I will say that as a kid, I was very interested in math and science, and um, it really piqued my interest from a real little, to. I was actually quite sickly as a kid, and so I had a lot of medication that my doctor was always prescribing for me. And so when I would pick up things from the pharmacy, I would always open up the little pamphlet, and most people don't even read the stuff that's in there. But it was always really interesting to me to see the mode of action. Like, how does this thing work? What is, and so that really drove me thinking about how I could be a part of the science and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how you can actually address these disease states is from thinking about, what to target. How do you develop treatments towards specific targets that can get to eradicate the problem? And so that's the perception and the point of view that I come to the science with. So it's the familial connection, and then what piqued my interest. And I will also say that I was one of those kids that, my mom would drop me off in the light. I'm genetic, so My mom would drop me off at the library, and you'd be there all day and read. She also saw that I had this real big interest in science, so she would take me to Radio Shack and get me those little kits where you would like wire things up and make the
Yeah.
bird sound or light up a light or something like that. And I was also really, thinking about the physical sciences part. I was the kind of kid that I was really interested in, like the caloric content of stuff. So one of the things, I was a little bit of a fire kind of kid. I did actually one time take different types of cereals to see like which one would light up faster, thinking about the caloric intake. So you never know what kinds of things will people's interests
Mhm.
and going into science. But I think it's the variety of experiences that kind of led me to that space.
That is dope. I mean, not often on this show do I get people who are like, yep, science was always there. I was doing science projects as a kid. They was dropping me off at the library. Usually it's, I got into high school and I did well in science and I decided to keep going. And so to hear someone who always kind of had a scientific mindset is like refreshing and awesome, because that was me too, always wanting to tinker, always into the science realm. And just knowing this going in is, yeah,
Well,
that's
I
cool.
think I had two factors. I had a mother that, was really invested in my education, and she saw something and really wanted to nurture it.
Hmm.
But I think we also undervalue how many of our kids actually are interested in science, right? Whether it's thinking about, oh, I'm collecting bugs as a little kid,
Right.
really you wind up doing, dissections of insects as you get into higher biology class, right? If you're thinking about people that like to make their own perfumes and makeup,
Hmm.
that is science.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of things that a lot of us as kids, we have our nature towards, but people just don't necessarily see it and nurture it.
Right. Oh no, I mean that's kind of what I wrote my master's thesis on, is, kids at a young age are automatically scientists. They're inquisitive, they want to learn something, they want to try something. Is as they get older, school and our parents are like, no, boys don't do this, girls don't do this, or we don't want you getting muddy or something of that nature. And even in schools they stop calling on the girls as much, and then cliques happen and it becomes this whole thing, and we lose out on students and kids who actually would be really good at it and having fun at it. They just were
Mm-hmm.
told no.
Mm-hmm. And then, the other part of it too, especially for our underrepresented kids, we don't often see a lot of folks like us doing this work, right? I was very
Absolutely.
fortunate being growing up in Chicago, where my parents, they would make me read the Jet, the Ebonies and all that kind of stuff. So I was seeing Black folks. It was a big deal that Percy Julian was from Chicago, right?
Mhm.
And seeing that on the PBS station, seeing his special, and so I was actually, we actually have to take the time to actually see people that look like us going into these spaces, because it's not really publicized and our stories aren't really told. So I appreciate the fact that you're trying to tell some of these stories so other folks can see it and say, hey, maybe I can do it too.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So we just met, but I feel like we're going to be best friends, because that's exactly, you have that same mindset that I have, which is like, yes, we are here. We need to see our stories, see ourselves in this, and encourage our kids to be open-minded. Like, you don't have to push them into science or STEM, but be open-minded to what they're interested in, and then work on that.
Exactly.
One of my favorite stories is from oh my sir, I forgot. It was a TED talk. Anyway, his name will come to me. But he was like, it was a little girl back in Europe, back in like the 20s, and was not paying attention in school. And they were like, you gotta take him to a psychiatrist or whatever. And he said this was before ADHD was invented. But, he said that the doctor was like, oh, she's not, slow. She's just not interested. Put her in dance class. it's more to the story, and I'll have to
Mhm.
share it another time. But she became a pivotal person in dance. And it was because they nurtured what she was actually interested in, and then instead of pushing her towards something else.
Mhm.
I've botched the story. But it's just,
That's an important point, though, because a lot of times, especially in our communities, because of our lack of exposure to other folks, maybe in Black History Month, you might hear about George Washington Carver or something like that. But for the most part, we think science in our community, we just immediately go to, oh, you just go to med school, right?
right.
And, oh, little Man's going to be a doctor. That's all we say, right? They're going to go to medical school and be a doctor.
Or they like animals and they'll be a veterinarian.
I don't even hear the veterinarian part as much. I guess it depends
Really?
on what part of the country you're in. So I think it's also important to give that kid an opportunity to explore a lot of different careers. Whether that's well, nowadays you don't even have to go to the library. You can Google stuff and Google people, right? And find
Right.
out the different things that they're doing, because it may not be that they are supposed to go to med school.
Right.
Because people don't realize is physicians are there to treat for the most part. There are some that do research, but they're more doing research on like clinical trials. So they're more on the tail end. They're not really thinking about the actual biochemistry or the mechanisms behind these disease states. That's actually coming from the PhDs,
Right.
right? And so, you're thinking about the money and you're thinking about, oh, this is the only thing I know. But it's important that we expand our horizons to find out all the other wonderful stuff that folks are doing. I mean, there's biomedical engineers, right? Where,
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones that are, coming with prosthetic devices. And a lot of times they're actually creating the tools or using in surgery now, right? So, and then there's also, biochemical engineers where they're doing some of that too. But then there are also the folks that are making sure that, the Eli Lillys, the Pfizers, the Berks are actually making these drugs right, in the manufacturing site. So there's so many wonderful ways that you can participate in STEM and still really contribute and still make money. Because at the end of the day, I know that's a big driver.
Right.
Is people make money.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So let me just say we are currently live on Facebook and YouTube. If you have questions or comments, put it in the chat. I do have one or two from Danielle saying introduce again. So this is Dr. Ann Kimble-Hill, PhD, Assistant Research Professor of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology at Indiana University School of Medicine. And she did say it's pivotal for kids to be introduced early to science. My parents bought me chemistry sets, microscope, and my dad took me to the marina to collect microorganisms, and it was fun. Yes, absolutely. All of that is like, we I hear people with boys who's like, he always comes home with rocks, and there's
Mhm.
always rocks in his pockets. And I have a son that will be 2 in November, and I'm like hoping he come home with rocks, because then I'll be like, let's do some geology, let's see what this is,
Well,
see what you.
if he's that interested in rocks, maybe he needs to go into civil engineering or something like that. Because to be honest, we need some better materials for our roads because they be jacked up in the Midwest. We can't do these multiple temperatures, fall, winter, spring, summer without getting potholes.
Oh, no,
So,
yeah. We in California where we have tepid weather and our roads are still horrible. Still horrible. So it's not even the wet. I don't know what it is, honestly, because I'm not an
the
engineer. But
materials,
yeah,
it's the materials.
we need some new materials for the roads. Absolutely. 'Cause, yeah, California sucks on potholes. It's just, yeah. But as you're saying, we definitely need our kids. We need people to see themselves in this. But we also need the parents to be open minded and introduce our kids to this because, as you said, there's so many careers that's out there that we wouldn't know about without Google. You know, we kind of grew up in an age without Google, so we couldn't find it. We only have what we saw in our faces.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's a whole thing we can go down. But I want to get back to you since you was a
Well,
scientific person. Go
you
ahead. Go
know,
ahead.
the other part of it too is because I'm in this space, and we talk about privilege so very loosely, but there's so many aspects of our identities that can lend to privilege. And I take very seriously the fact that I am in this space where I'm an educator. I'm also in the academic system where I can be a force of change and provide opportunities for our younger folks to come in and learn and see someone else like them. So that's a big part of why I stayed in academia and did not go into industry. But I also carry that over into a lot of my administrative roles at Indiana University. So that's why I'm doing a lot of things with, like, for example, I coordinate our post baccalaureate program for kids that underrepresented students that want to get a PhD in biomedical relevant sciences. So there's a lot of coaching there because these kids have graduated from college, but we want to make sure they get a more intensive research experience so that they're coached into how do they present their science to the public? How do they then go into interview when it comes time to interview for graduate school? A lot of people don't realize that most of these programs actually interview you. How are you putting your package together so that you can get the interview?
Right.
So I'm working with them on that. And then I do things like I was recently named as the assistant director for diversity, equity, and inclusion for our cancer center, our comprehensive cancer center for IU. And so in that role, I'm doing a lot of things where we're educating folks in the best ways to mentor our
Mm-hmm.
underrepresented students, thinking about the climate, making sure we're educating people about the different types of cancers that are more affecting certain populations than others. How do we go out into the community and make sure that they're aware of what they should be screening for? I've been doing so. I'm not only just doing science. I'm doing the holistic thing because I was raised with the thought that if you're going to be part of the talented 10th, there is this sense of responsibility to reach back to make sure that the next generation goes farther than you did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wasn't that W.E.B. Du Bois who said that?
No, I think it was Booker Washington, but I could
Oh,
be
okay.
I could be mistaken. I could be
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah, I could be mistaken.
Somebody will throw it
Yeah.
in the chat. I'm sure somebody will throw it in the chat. That was a big part of the way I was raised, was thinking about our community and that we're progressing as a community. It's not just about me making it. It's about how I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors. I'm the first generation, part of the first generation of my family, especially my dad's side, to actually go to college and get advanced degrees and whatnot. And so in building that legacy, it's not just my legacy. It's what are my students are doing after that. Who else am I helping to move forward? I'm cracking the ceiling open a little bit more, but I want to make sure it's easier for the folks that come behind me to be as successful or more successful than I am.
Yes. Yes to everything you just said. We have to take what we're doing to make sure the next generation has an opportunity. I had a advisor, he passed away, but what he would do in college is for the freshmen, he'd do a presentation on strange fruit. And it was, we all know what strange fruit is. And he was just like, these people died, got hurt, mauled, everything for you to have an opportunity to sit here and be educated. So why are you taking this for granted? And it's very true. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, but we are also the shoulders for the next generation. And we have to make sure they have opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, for me and my family, on my dad's side particularly, my dad, when he was young, they grew up sharecropping in Mississippi, and so they told us that we have opportunities, we have to capitalize on it, and so that was ingrained in us, that that work ethic, making sure that we are financially responsible, but that we were building a family legacy. And so that was so important when I'm thinking about making choices, life choices, and thinking about what I put my time and energy to. How am I helping to build that legacy?
Right. I mean, I started this podcast, with no kids. And now I have a son, and I'm like, I started it for me, but I continue it for him because
Mhm.
everyone I'm meeting doing the podcast potentially can be a mentor for him when he gets older and open doors for him. And not just him, other kids, that might be interested in it. So I do this to keep make sure I have a Rolodex, and that's old because I don't think nobody has Rolodexes anymore. Rolodex of people.
Electronic electronic address books, right? But I think you have
Exactly.
something very important between talking about your professor in college and thinking about what your son is hitting, because I went to University of Michigan for undergrad, and this was in the late '90s. But to be frank, in my chemistry department at the University of Michigan at that time, there was one black professor, and I was a chemical engineering major, and there was one black professor in chemical engineering.
Wow.
So having that Rolodex of people to actually say, okay, I see myself in them, has been very short over time. The statistics suggest that we may be only graduating maybe 5 to 6 Black PhDs in chemistry per year across the entire United States.
Ooh.
It's awful. And
Yeah.
so the few of us that are here, I see a lot of us, we're putting that inroads in, but um, you kind of have to work to find us. And that's the part I'm trying to change, because the more people that we encourage to go into science, the more role models you are able to see.
Yes, absolutely. And after this podcast, we can keep this conversation going because yes, this is all everything that I'm trying to do. There's more that I'm doing here where I am in Oakland, California. I had a great meeting with somebody in Georgia earlier today. Like we're trying to, as they said, we're all these little silos trying to do and get kids in STEM. Instead of being silos by ourselves, let's bring it all together so that we're getting this message out further. So we will keep that conversation going. I do want to get to the comments and questions in the chat. Diane said my son will probably be the head of WHO because of me as his mom. Hey, he could be president of WHO. He could be president, whatever. I'm gonna just let him be.
And to be honest, if you've been seeing what's been happening with the CDC, the FDA, NIH, we need more of us in these spaces.
Yes, yes. They threw up Dr. Kismet, as that face for COVID, and I was like,
A
she's
problematic face.
so. We could just go on to the question that's in the question is from Milan. What should I do as a parent with a non-science background to foster an interest in science in my children? And I know her children are young still.
Well, one of the things you can do, because you honestly do not have to be a scientist to encourage your kids' interests. Okay. My mom was definitely not a scientist. She had did some early ed classes, but I'm not sure what's happening. But one of the things that she, like I said, she did bought a lot of those kits for me to play with. And nowadays, there's so many cool kits on Amazon. I buy them for my nieces and nephews all the time. Um, there's like these kits where you make your own makeup, or you can use different types of sand to make, murals, and there's all kinds of wonderful stuff out there that you could purchase. And I will tell you that some of the libraries have gotten grants to buy kits as well. So you could possibly check out some of these kits from the library, where you can have your kids play with them. And then as you start having them play with different things, you can kind of see where their interest kind of lies, what really got them really excited. Were they more of the slime kind of kid, or were they more of the, ant collector kind of kid? Were they the kind that, they just wanted to take the magnifying glass and put it in the sun and burn up a leaf? What is really driving their interest so that you can then really hone towards that direction. The other thing is the encouragement to actually take the science and math classes. A lot of our kids are not really being encouraged in that space. They're not really being pushed to participate in those kind of things. And so that's important to do as well. The final thing I'm going to say, um, maybe a little bit controversial for some folks to think about, but what I do see is our parents oftentimes are spending a lot of time pushing our kids now into doing sports. And I'm not anti sports because I played sports in middle school, high school, and all that good stuff. But I did not do it as competitively as a lot of kids are doing now, where they're doing travel leagues and stuff like that. Now, if your kid really has that aptitude, and I mean, the reality is every kid is not going to be drafted into a major league. But if they have that, then okay, fine. Put them in the sports. But be aware that oftentimes they become so involved in some of these sports activities that it precludes them from participating in the other science activities that they need to do. Right. And so, for example, I had some kids that I would have loved to push to be in Project C during the summer, where they could have been actually in a collegiate lab as a high school student doing research, getting on publications, really pushing their career forward. But then they were saying, but I'm playing volleyball travel league in the summer. I can't do that. And I was like, you don't realize that your peers are doing all this science stuff. They're doing, state science fair. They're doing science Olympiad, middle school, high school. So they've got all this stuff on their resume before they even get to college that has prepared them for college. So they're a step forward when they're thinking about, recommendations and scholarships and fellowships and grants and, what's on their resume when they go to apply for graduate school. So they've already built this resume. And so I just caution people that you're making sure that your kid is not so involved in the extracurricular of sports that they don't do the other pieces of science that's going to actually help them for the long run of their career.
Well, as someone who is athletically challenged, I can see where you're coming from, with the sports aspect. And yes, I hear about those travel leagues, all that good stuff. And when I pre-pandemic, I would do talks and I would say, I went to the schools and I would say, you're playing, let's say, basketball for your school. Think about all the high schools in Oakland. Think about all the high schools in our county. Think about all the high schools in California. Now think about all the high schools in 50 states. Like, I'm not saying you can't go professional, but what I am saying is if they're not looking at you in high school, you may not get to that level, and to always have a backup.
Looking at middle school. A lot of kids, they're in this track from middle school on. So
right. And and I'm just saying, have a backup. Have a backup, especially in math. No, because you need to know your finances. I've heard so many stories and know of people personally who went into the NFL and came out and a few years later had no money. Right. And so you don't know your finances, you don't know your math, and that's what's important, And like you said, there's lots of kids, especially non-Black kids, who are taking college level classes in high school. They're going to the community college. They're taking this extra workload and they're getting AAs when they're graduating in high school, which means only 2 years of college you have to consider paying for if you're not already getting grants and scholarships. So, there's so many ways to do it and no one's perfect and there's no right or wrong answer, but just being open-minded to different pathways that your kids can go down.
Yeah.
So I see a couple of things. Thank you guys. Leaf said that's cool. Black Math Academy said Rochelle Harris rocks with micro. Who's Rochelle Harris? I don't know. Candace said you're right. And then the Black Math Academy says they're curious. What math do you use?
Well, it depends on what I'm doing. But we do a lot of stoichiometry when we're mixing like buffers and stuff like that. So we're doing a lot of basic math, a lot of algebra. For a lot of our calculations, for example, if we're trying to measure like the growth rate of cells. When you're thinking about tumor formation, we do, some basic calculus with that as well. Um, as a chemical engineer, obviously, I had to take all the way through, 4 years or 4 semesters of calculus. So I have the capability to do more math than we actually are doing on a regular basis. But most of us, to be honest, in a more biological system, most times you're not going beyond more of, first year of calculus, to be honest.
Awesome. Yeah, and Danielle says parents can teach their kids how to make soaps like I do. That's science. If you're interested in makeup, learn facial scrubs for different skin combos. Cooking is science. Yes, I always say cooking is chemistry. But there's so many ways to engage and bond with your children, saying, because pretty much anything and everything you're doing, it has a science base.
It
Or
does.
you're on your phone or your tablet, all that stuff is a tech base. It's all there in math.
I will tell you one of the big things that is happening right now is a lot of our equipment is being it used to be big computers that we were used to run stuff. They're doing stuff now where they're doing it on the cell phone. We're doing, now you're seeing things where you can calculate concentrations of things using um, programs on your cell phone where you're taking a picture of stuff and it's calculating. So, technology has come a long way, but it takes the imagination of folks. And that's why it's also important to have a lot of different folks in these spaces, because we can bring our own perspectives and our backgrounds and our imagination that other folks wouldn't have. And that helps enrich the science, period.
Absolutely. I had to interview a woman in virtual reality to write a children's book for, and in that virtual reality, and they need the scientists, they need the psychiatrists, they need the artists to make the visuals. They need the computer engineers, they need the math people. So like all of these different disciplines all fit together to create a virtual reality world that's helping people get over their fears and phobias. And so as we're both saying, I believe, is just being open-minded and nurturing your child, whatever they're interested in, just but giving them the option to be interested in like a plethora of things, and not you get interested in what I'm interested because that's the only things that's available. No, even if I don't know, even if I don't understand what you like, I'm going to nurture what you like.
And you never know what how those other things are going to show up, because, like, for example, at one point in time in middle school, I thought I might be a computer programmer. Then I got to some programs later on that was like, it's a little bit difficult, trying to debug these programs. Back then, C and Fortran wasn't cute. Um, but that skill set shows up now when we're talking about I have to sort through my data. Sometimes we're, creating scripts that help analyze the data, So now what's really big is informatics, so that you can go through patient data. And so having that understanding of how that works plays into understanding how we're going to pull data to then set up my science that I'm doing in my lab. So you never know how these different interests are going to show up later on in your career.
And I just saw um, this report that came out from the White House on September 9th that there's a lot of money that they're putting towards data science and space
Mm-hmm.
science. So those are some disciplines that still use math, still use science that you can be a part of. And I was talking to someone earlier today because I had an opportunity to get my PhD in computer science and data science, and I didn't want to do it because I was like, I don't want to sit on a computer all day. I don't want to do that. That sounds terrible. Now I'm like, dang, I done missed out on like buku money. And not everybody is sitting at a computer. There's different things you could be doing with it. And I've, punched myself for missing that opportunity. But, I'm not too old. I can go back to school if I wanted to. However, these disciplines are there.
Well, because like I'll do simulations now, to use computer programs where we try to figure out how, basically, to theorize how these different protein structures might be actually happening in the body, or how proteins might be interacting with lipids. I will literally set that program up and go off and do something else all the rest of the day while I'm waiting for that program to finish running. So it's not always sitting at the computer the whole time when you have these simulations and things going either.
Right. And so Felicia asked, what kids book can I read to my baby and show her different leaves? When we take walks, she loves to pick up leaves and hear the sound of them when she steps on them. So Felicia's talking about my grandbaby, which means now I'm on a mission to find a book, because I will find you a book, Felicia, on leaves for her. That is a promise, because now I'm on a mission. Now I'm on grandma mode. I will find one.
You
And then
think of there's all those kind of great books thinking about the different types of plants, right? Where she can, talk about the different, types of plants and how they're related or in the same family. We don't think about, like, there's just simple things like grass. There's like not just one type of grass. There's a there's a bunch.
yeah,
The leaves are different, right? The colors of them are different. So there's a lot of stuff out there in that space.
oh yeah, especially here in California, because grass is not quote unquote normal. It doesn't fit our weather pattern, which is why a lot of people are switching out their lawns for California native plants.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but you can learn all about that. And, like I said, I'm on grandma mode now, because I will find all of the information you need on leaves and get that for my baby. The Black Math Academy says this is why you learn all you can. Sorry about the noise outside. That's why you learn all you can, precisely because you never know where it shows up. That's so true. Fortune favors the prepared. You're right. I was ill prepared on that one, but it's okay. Other things have come from where I have gone, so I'm okay. And
You
Christina
know
said,
what? It's
"Go ahead."
interesting that you brought up the math thing with the you never know how you're gonna use it. One of the things my mom used to do with me, because she saw I had a proclivity to math, was she would make me think about fractions from cutting up pies. Saying,
Okay.
what's the third of a slice? You're talking about, cutting the pie. What is a third of the pie? What's a quarter of the pie? What's a half of the pie? What's an eighth of the pie? I mean, the reality is you should know how to cut up a pie, right? But just getting that slight exposure and thinking about the math behind what you already innately know how to do, right? That's some simple stuff just to get the kid thinking a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even if they're like, "Can I have some of your soda?" Be like, "Well, what's a third of 12 ounces of this soda that you about to get?" You can add math and science to practically anything you're doing.
And a lot of our refrigerators now, if you have the autofill kind of button for getting water in your cup, it's you have to say how many ounces you want to go into the cup. Or even when you're doing your coffee, how many ounces do you want the cup to be, right?
Right. It's like, yeah, it's like including your kids into the conversation and making them think, outside the box. Like, we can quickly just be like, "Here's your juice box," or whatever. But you can also ask, well, how much ounces is in that? What's half of that? A fourth of that? Like, there's different ways. I mean, I got a ways to go because mine isn't even 2 yet. But there's so many things that you can do. Christina says, as a preschool teacher, you are making me think about my science and cultural show. What more does it need? I don't know, because I don't know what's on your shelf, but I will say, I don't know, because you teach me about preschool and my kids, so I don't even know what to put on your shelf, honestly.
I think there's some really great kids books coming out right now where they're highlighting different folks in science. And they're writing it in a way that's more kid friendly. There are some things that great women chemists kind of books. The first name is escaping me, but her last name is Brown. She has a couple of books where she talks about different Black women in chemistry and different Black women in science. The other thing is that there's some great movies out there, like I was talking about the supernova specials that PBS does, and you can pull those at any time off of PBS's website, and you can cherry pick which parts you want to show to them. And then there's so many inventors out there that, they have the little cards that you can get where you can, just the exposure, just, Garrett Morgan and the gas mask, and, you can go through these different things where you just piquing their interest in just being able to visually see someone that looks like them changes their perception, right? And if you can catch them younger, they're more likely to stick with it as they get older.
I guess I need to rethink my kid's room. Start putting. I mean, he's got a bunch of science books and all that stuff, but I don't think I have any. Well, I know I don't have any like posters and stuff. So now I got to think about that for myself. See, these conversations make me think too. This is awesome. Um, Danielle said, I want to learn how to desalinate my own water in case of apocalypse or endless drought, which seems quite plausible in our current elongated drought situation in California. That, yeah, I mean that I guess that falls under engineering too. Um,
So there are a couple of plants that do public tours. I know there's one in Florida because I went to that one, and there is one in California as well. Um, and I do know that Bill Gates was doing some things with recycling water as well and trying to make it more economical. Because the problem right now is the current processes for desalinizing water use so much more water. I think you use like 100 times water than you actually get as the output to try to remove all that salt. And so, again, having great new minds to come into that conversation and think about different ways to do it, because the traditional ways that they have been doing it right now, it's not cost effective.
right.
And you're right, the necessity, they say necessity is the mother of invention. So, if you want to get in that problem, that is a real problem that needs to be solved.
Well, I mean, yes, that is a problem that needs to be solved. I had to do a whole report on fracking and all the
Mm-hmm.
water they use that cannot be reused after they use it for fracking. And, that's all goes under oil and using oil and gas and all that good stuff. So there's so many thoughts that need to be used and considered, you know. I
Well,
feel like,
and when
go ahead.
even when you talk about fracking in the oil and gas, right? We usually use salt water because it's heavier than normal water, right? But we all know that salt water still isn't as dense as oil, right? So, the environmental impact of replacing something that's really dense to something that's not as dense, that has an environmental impact. Maybe that's leading to more earthquakes. You don't know. So
They
we have
know. They
they,
know.
yeah. I mean, there's no real proven study until you actually have the earthquake, though. But the reality is that we need folks to get into these spaces where you can actually have better improvements than we did before.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's been some years since I did my report on fracking, but I know that they were adding petroleum to the water to help with the fracking. But yes, as my resident lawyer friend Alon says, fracking, that's a fun legal concept too. Yeah, that the legal part of that is a whole nother beast. But
Mm-hmm.
we need our people talking about this, and we need our people in these conversations, because the environmental impact, and a lot of times where they're doing this type of work, is impacting people of color,
Mm-hmm.
you know and we need people of color at the table to push back and to have a better conversation of what's going on and how we can do this without causing so many issues, you know what I mean, with the environment and with the people. It's well, it's a big conversation.
I mean, thinking about the waste that's produced from most manufacturing, and where that is disposed of, and really understanding the impact. Our communities of color tends to be the areas that have the most pollution, which then shows up as asthma and all these other issues that truly affect our communities. So we need to have people in the regulatory side that understand the science too, to really make sure that we're looking out for our communities. This is not just on the bench. There's a lot of other spaces where, is the CEO making the decision on, are they going to release this into our, drinkable water source? You know,
Right.
I
And
hope
we need
it's someone that understands the impact to the community.
right. And that's why we also need people in science on Capitol Hill. You
Yes.
know, that's going to be talking about these all these new policies and programs that's coming out. You know, you have all these politicians writing it without a scientist backing it. And
Mm-hmm.
then we see the issues that come from it. And I had like a quick story in Oakland. For those who are in Oakland, we got two freeways, 880 and 580. 880 is more towards the water and it's more in the low income area. 580 kind of separates the people who live in the hills with people who could live in the hills if they just had a little bit more money. And only trucks are allowed on 880, the one in the low income area. And they
Mm-hmm.
don't have as many trees and foliage as 580. So now you don't have the plants catching the CO2 coming from the trucks. And you only have trucks going in low income areas that's getting all of this pollutants in the air. And so there was a research project done on that showed a lot of those kids closer to 880 have asthma. And that's just a quick little story of how that environmental injustice is can happen on the political area and the people making the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But woo, okay, we got like 10 minutes left. This has been a great conversation. But back to you, you know, we it was something you talked about a while ago that I wanted to touch on, which was going to PhD versus MD, you know, and I know your story of going into the research aspect was familial and but you could have went MD. You could have kind of studied this, you could have did MD PhD. What made you stick to the PhD platform?
Well, at one period of time, I did think about it, but the reality is that I really do not like sickness in a way. So like for example, if you throw up on camera right now, I might be throwing up with you. So I probably have no business really with really sick patients from that perspective. I'm a little, squeamish, and so that was a big part of why I decided not to do MD. But the reality is like I said, the kinds of things that really interested me was really the chemistry behind how these drugs worked, and really thinking about how I could use that to affect the issue. So that lends more towards the PhD versus the MD.
Gotcha. I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense. Once you see certain things in the ER, you might be like, "Ooh, okay, that's not my cup of tea."
Mm-hmm.
Danielle says she loves your t-shirts, which I was gonna say too. I just didn't get a chance, but that good trouble, yes,
Well,
beautiful.
sometimes we do have to be good trouble, and that was a part of what I was talking about earlier about how you use your platform of privilege to affect change. And so I really try to imbibe that.
That's good. I love it. That's one of those things where the trouble shouldn't even be trouble in the first place. But, you got to cause it a little bit of it to create change.
Well, the reality is it's considered trouble because usually when I'm walking into the room, I'm the only. I'm either the only black person, the only woman, or I'm the only black woman.
Yes,
uh,
and I've heard that story so much. Like even talking about you're doing research on breast cancer. The woman I had on my podcast on Monday, she does prostate cancer for black men. And she's at Clark Atlanta, and she's the only person of color on the research team, and that's at Clark Atlanta.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, I hear this unfortunately a lot that women, especially Black women, are the only ones in the room and still fighting the good fight to stay in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Black Math Academy, some of my students who are into chemistry, I showed them how math is involved with drugs. Active ingredients are tied to standard deviation. So, thanks for mentioning your love of chemistry. Absolutely.
And the other thing I was going to throw out there too, not only is it about the people that make decisions in the room, but we also need the people outside the room to put pressure on the people that do make decisions. So being an informed voter, is important too, right? Because my funding to do my work comes all from federal dollars. And people don't realize how much money scientific stuff costs. Like I was telling my students that we bought one vial of cells to do our experiments with, and it cost $650 for that one vial. And it wasn't a big vial; it was like this size vial. Okay, you know. So we need you all to be informed to make sure that you are pushing your senators and your congressmen to have good budgets for us to do this work. Because if we're underfunded, we can't solve our racial disparity issues. We can't. We just don't have the money to do it. So that's
Right.
another part of it.
I mean, a terrible joke here was going. I was going to ask. I was just asking anyway. Are these Henrietta Lacks cells?
No, I don't do HeLa cells. But this is an interesting and important thing because when we're talking about the racial disparities, we need tissue samples from the people we're trying to study these cancers in, right? And so for me, while there's a lot of biobanked cancer cells from white women, I cannot find enough from Black women to match the sample sizes. And so it's very important to have our people involved in the science from the perspective of donating tissue.
Wow.
It can be as simple as if you are getting, if you are diagnosed with cancer and you're getting a mastectomy or whatever, lumpectomy, you can ask your doctor to have some of that tissue biobanked for research. Now, I understand that we have some cultural issues, with ourselves because we've heard of HeLa story, Henry Lack's story. We've heard about Tuskegee and some of these other stories. But the reality is that we're making so many more strides in ethics. For our PhD students, you cannot get a degree without having a whole series of classes on ethics now. So there's a lot of HIPAA laws and things that have been put in place. And the reality is you have more people like me trying to do this work. So we need access to these great samples to help actually solve the problems.
Woo! Preacher. Okay. Are you familiar with Tracy Jackson? I think that's how you say it. She's a mathematician who uses math to study cancer growth.
The name sounds familiar, but I'm not clicking. Is she the one that was doing? Is she the one that did the new imaging source to see tumors?
I don't know. That was a question in the chat. I don't know who that person is. So here's the thing. You can send me her information and I will send it to Dr. Kimble-Hill, because what we do is we gonna make collaborations and make sure we all get to meet each other and get to know each other, right?
Amen.
There we go. And Aaron. So in the last few minutes, is there any last thing you want to say before we end this podcast?
We've covered a lot. I think that the other thing that I will say is that we talked a little bit about being the only in the spaces and how you oftentimes have to be good trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't talk about the support systems that we need when we are in these spaces and we are seen as the troublemaker. It's so very, very important that if you have people in your lives or if your kids decide to go in these spaces, that you have to be their emotional support system as they're in these spaces, because it does take an emotional toll when you have to go in and fight every day. And so that is a very, very important part of being able to get up and go in there every day and do the work, not just the science, because the reality is, like you talked about, the networks and things like that. A lot of times when we go in these spaces, we don't get access to the same network because we're not a part of that old white boys club, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so having an emotional support system is very, very important for long term success. So they stay in there and they keep fighting.
Wow. Danya said her small high school class is trying to figure out why so many of their women have fallen from breast cancer. It was an all girls school. They're now wondering if someone's in the building. It was more aggressive for Black female students, but the ratio is still disturbing. I mean, you never know, you know.
You can always call a health inspector out to see if there's like an asbestos problem. Um, and if it's a neighborhood where you have generational, you might have a collection of genes in that space that has a higher proclivity as well. So it's probably going to need a multi-pronged approach. But the first thing I would do is just make sure it's not an environmental issue. So you
Yeah.
can always check to make sure there's not, because there are stories out there that once they actually called a health inspector out, like they found out there was a higher amount of, some type of toxic metal in that soil around there, or different things like that that you just wouldn't think about that are causing cancer. So that's where I would start.
Right. Okay. Well, Alon is seconding my sentiment, which is thank you for your time and sharing your information. Black Math Academy said, "Got you." So I'm assuming he's gonna send me information about that doctor, and I can send it to you. But you can also look up Dr. Kimble-Hill. I found her by looking her up. She's at Indiana University of Medicine doing great research. And again, thank you for taking time out tonight to chat with me about your story.
Well, if I can just help one person as I walk along the way, my living wasn't in vain, right?
Oh dear. Okay. With that note, oh yeah, thank you for everything. Thank y'all all in the chats. But on that note, I want you guys to have a great Wednesday. I gotta go pick up my kid now and also have some dinner. So make sure you like, follow, and share. This will be on the podcast in about a week or two. And there's so much more that's coming down the line. I hope you guys stay tuned for what's going on. But have a good